Hello. I'm not in my van today. Isn't that exciting? So one of my dear friends that we've actually been praying for her. She's the one that has all the mental and health stuff that we haven't been able to name. Well, she just gave us permission to say her name. Her name is Mia. She's with us. You want to say hi, Mia?
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Thank you for your prayers. They are working.
Yeah, very good. We like that. In fact, they're working so much that she has enough strength to let me into her home and record the Bible study. And we're hoping we can make that a regular thing. But we'll go week by week on that one. Yeah.
I hope it works.
Yeah, we hope it works. Yeah, we'll see though. But we would like to thank Mia for opening her home to us this week. So yeah, that's exciting. So as always, we like to start with a quick deep breathing exercise. Excuse me. So we just want to take 3 deep breaths. So we're just gonna do that now. So go in. In. Yeah, don't fall over me. Yeah. Fantastic. So nice to start out that way. I'm just gonna double check. Okay. So after the breathing exercise, I like to do a quiet worship song, something meditative that you can kind of reflect on, maybe like sing it quietly to yourself, sway to the lyrics. But this is YouTube and or Facebook, so I can't actually play it here. But for those watching on YouTube, if you go into the description, it's the link for quiet worship. That's the song that I would recommend you use. And if you want to play that and do breathing, meditate, get in that headspace, and then when you're done with that, then you can come back here and watch the rest of the video. Does that sound like a plan? Fantastic. So you can do that right now. And you're back. Thank you, Mia. Mia's very entertained by my antics. I hope you liked the song. It's a fun one. Semi-relevant to the study. I've been trying to make them relevant to the study lately, so hopefully it gets you in that mindset. This week we're doing chapter 16, and we're trying out the King James. We're trying out a more modern King James, but still King James. It's definitely going to be a heavier episode. We're going to be talking about Hagar, who is known as an abused slave. So, trigger warning to those who have suffered any kind of abuse. It's going to be a difficult read, and it doesn't help that we're trying out King James Version this week. It's definitely going to be one of the longer ones, but hopefully that just makes it more interesting, and I'm especially hoping I can show you guys how this chapter isn't as bad as it seems, especially with God's own nuance in the situation. So with that hope in mind, let's just dive right in. I'm going to get a drink though, because my throat is so dry for some reason. They had Diet Green Tea Arizona, and it's my favorite, and I had to get it. Literally my favorite. Okay, so chapter 16 starts. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. So, Hagar, for those who aren't aware, likely came from the time Abram and Sarai went to Egypt to wait out the famine, and Pharaoh gave Abram a bunch of material goods, livestock, and slaves and servants. It's also worth pointing out that race-based slavery wasn't really an established thing until the 1500s, so that kind of slavery wasn't exactly this kind of slavery. Slaves in ancient Near East times tended to be, economically indebted. They maybe owed somebody money that they couldn't pay. Their whole family was too poor to be anything but slaves. So they're just born into it, or they were prisoners of war, or just some kind of like low threat criminal that's like trying to pay their debt to society, stuff like that. It wasn't as much of a racial superiority vibe as much as an economic superiority vibe. So what did Sarai do with Hagar? Why is that being mentioned? Let's find out in the next verse. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. So, for those who don't speak medieval, Sarai tells Abram that God has made her barren, and maybe she's not meant to be the mother of Abram's promised child. Got Pico barking in the background now. We are recording, Pico. Hopefully the mic doesn't pick that up too much. It's okay. So she tells Abram to marry Hagar and use her as a surrogate, which he does. And some scholars note that there was a special ritual that went with surrogacy. It wasn't exactly polygamy so much as like a momentary situation. The surrogate would actually sit on the wife's lap while the husband inseminated her, making it really clear that this was a substitute, but it wasn't the real deal. We're not sure if Abram did this or just had like a regular second marriage, but it is an absolutely wild thing to picture. Like, I'm sure that's very awkward. So, I can say that much. But Enduring Word, the lovely commentary that my grandmother recommended to me oh so long ago, they say that this is polygamy, sorry, which is a sin, but I personally think that this is unfair, since beyond the difference between surrogacy and polygamy, which we've already mentioned, they didn't have the technology for like a clinical surrogacy back then. This was the only moral way to have a kid if one of your partners was infertile. If the surrogacy as we see it now is seen as moral, then their version of surrogacy should also be seen as moral. Like, I don't think lack of technology isn't immoral. I don't think. And on a personal note, I don't think it's actually that egregious to practice polygamy as long as all parties involved are genuinely consenting to it. God definitely makes it clear what he would prefer in a marriage, but I see marriage as a bit of like a ritual act. So I think it actually has a little bit more leniency than people give it credit for, but we can get into that later. What is questionable is doing something without God's permission or sentence, which seems to be what is happening here. In all fairness to Sarai, however, God had said Abram would be the father of Israel, but never said anything about Sarai being the mother. And after decades of waiting, she's like mid-80s at this point, you would probably start to question that interpretation. And I don't think it was necessarily a sin for Sarai to do this. I think she was working with the best information she had at the time. The potential problem is, and to be fair, it's hard to say this with any certainty, it doesn't look like Sarai or Abram came to God with this new plan of theirs. At best they prayed and God was silent, or at least they didn't hear God's answer, so they acted on their own accord. It's a common and honestly frustrating theme of Christianity for God to do things in his own time without much consideration of our own anxious timeline or even communication of when things actually will happen. God really, really likes to surprise people, I think. But it's not simple, superficial things that come and go, like parties or some jewelry. It's things like jobs or life directions, or in this case, children, like things that really matter. And it's certainly amazing when you get these things, but it's so frustrating how God tends to wait until the last possible moment to give them to you. Like, we are mortal beings. We don't have time to wait and hope and wonder, you know? But of course, the funny thing is that we actually do. We think that we don't because we don't know how our lives will turn out. Like, we could be dead any second. We don't know for sure, but God does. He knows exactly how much time you have and when the exactly right time to introduce new things or give you an answer is. I think that that's an important perspective to have. You know, we know that Abram and Sarai eventually have a kid, like many other periods of waiting in the Bible. Eventually the people got exactly what they were waiting for, sometimes more. Often we're going to feel like all we have been doing is waiting, but I think if you can trust God's timing over your own, you'll get a satisfying ending eventually. The other thing is, many are probably wondering why God didn't specify Sarai in his original covenant to Abram. This whole thing might have been avoided, or at the very least, Sarai and Abram could have been more clearly in the wrong if God was clear about Sarai being the one to bear his descendants. And this goes more into why I don't think Sarai using Hagar as a surrogate by itself was actually a sin, or like not a sin. We, of course, don't know for sure God's reasoning, but going beyond the usual, you know, you just have to wait for God to be clear if you're not sure, or it was just a test type of thing. I have a theory that God actually secretly wanted Hagar to have one of Abram's sons. God no doubt would have loved if Abram and Sarai faithfully waited for their son to be born, but God also knew they weren't going to do that and saw them using Hagar down the line. And maybe God knew if he specified Sarai, they maybe would have waited, or maybe he knew they'd get impatient either way and end up using Hagar as a surrogate regardless. If it was the latter, God likely saw Hagar's son prior to his conception, as he can do, and absolutely adored him, as God tends to do as well. And maybe there was like a pragmatic side to this too. You know, it'd be a lot easier for Abram's descendants to be numerous if he had two sons, even if only one of them could be like the chosen one. But I think on a more sentimental note, God wanted to bless not only Ishmael and Abram, but Hagar as well. And this was a way to do it. And we'll get more into the details of that later, but I think God allowed for a loophole that caused Sarai and Abram like confusion and concern, which led to Hagar's son, who she loved, by the way, to him being born. I don't think God was necessarily trying to trick them into it, though. I think he just left it up to them to decide. You know, going back to the whole like free will and God partnering with humanity, not controlling them. He was like, you know, you could just have the one son if you're like patient, but if you want to go like crazy, there could also be two. Also, and he just let them decide how they wanted to go about it. And you know, like I said, maybe even if God had specified Sarai would be the mother, they wouldn't have gotten impatient and used Hagar instead. But I think if they were gonna be impatient either way, and he had said that like no, Sarai will be the mother also, then God would have had to actually get upset at them, because now they're going directly against what he's saying and doing their own thing. Like it's a lot more blatant. So I think God let it be open-ended so no one would have to be implicated too badly because of it. He didn't want to punish anyone because, like, the wrong child was born and they shouldn't even exist. Like, it's contrary to his nature. Like, God doesn't see any child as one that shouldn't exist. They are all beloved by him, and that's what you'll see too. God doesn't get angry at Abram or Sarai for using a surrogate, and he can get away with blessing Hagar's son without getting caught in a contradiction. So I really think God wanted Ishmael to be born because he did actually love him and want him to be born, and all the people that came from him. And he was eager to see him live, and one day, mostly after Jesus, but post Jesus too, he wanted to watch even Ishmael's descendants be part of building the kingdom of God. So I don't think God was really all that angry or disappointed that Hagar was used as a surrogate. It's just, I think it's like a nice thought, at least, that God wants the children from, let's say, less traditional pregnancies. Like, he thinks those are important too, and they are worth being alive. Anyways, what happened when Hagar got pregnant? Let's find out in the next verse, which is, "And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be unto thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hands. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her face." Okay, so this is where things get tricky and touchy. So Hagar gets pregnant, and this is going to be upsetting to Sarai, who now knows for sure that she is in fact the reason Abram hasn't had a kid yet. That much everyone can agree on. But the reaction to this new turn of events has two main interpretations, which really set the tone for what happens after this. So one interpretation is more traditional. After Hagar gets pregnant, she gets really smug about it because she was able to do the one thing that her mistress was supposed to be able to do. And Hagar is pregnant with her master's child. So she has an opportunity to possibly rise up in the ranks a bit, and she might be trying to do exactly that and usurp Sarai. This obviously is going to upset Sarai, and she complains to her husband about it, saying it's all his fault for going through with the surrogacy plan because now Hagar is smug. She's being like a power-grabbing bitch about it. And Abram tells her, she's your servant, keep her in line if you must. Like, I don't care. And Sarai takes that as permission to just go to town on Hagar. We don't know exactly what she did. I'm guessing she beat the shit out of her, but maybe she just made her do like some hard labor, or she just said some really mean shit to her. Either way, Hagar obviously didn't appreciate whatever she did, so she ran away. Now with this interpretation, both Hagar and Sarai can be seen in the wrong here. Hagar shouldn't have been smug and like power hungry with her pregnancy, and Sarai shouldn't have overreacted like she did either, and that makes the next part more palatable. However, the other more modern interpretation makes this a little more one-sided and dark. In it, Hagar did not consent to being Abram's surrogate, but she is their slave, essentially. So she was forced to conceive with Abram. And because of this, when she got pregnant with Abram, she saw Sarai as someone who basically got her husband to impregnate her by raping her. And obviously, she's going to shoot Sarai dirty looks because of it. And Sarai, she knew why Hagar saw her as like this villain, and probably didn't like thinking of herself or being seen by others in that way, much less being prompted by someone who was pregnant with her husband's child, something she always wanted to do. So, being the insecure woman that she was, she complained to Abram, who only cared about Sarai, not Hagar, who was really only a tool to get what they wanted. So he let her perform whatever justice she saw fit, and for Sarai, that was being absolutely merciless to a slave woman she had already forced to be raped by her husband. Now, not a great look. So personally, I don't see anything blatantly wrong with either interpretation that would discount it from being true. The text isn't especially clear how Hagar felt about Abram and Sarai, about being Abram and Sarai surrogate, whether she saw it as a way to climb up the social ladder or as her like gross old masters forcing her into a commitment and like a sexual act against her will. I will say, if you take the latter approach and the more modern one, it makes the next part more difficult to swallow. Not impossible, but difficult. Before we get into that, though, I want to take a quick moment to point out how Sarai blamed Abram for taking Hagar as his surrogate, even though it was her idea to do so. Many scholars, especially the more conservative ones, agree entirely, saying Abram should have known better than to listen to his crazy wife when she was spouting heresy. See, I'm thinking about the old-timey version, like hearsay.
Yeah,
I'm getting it mixed up. Heresy. As the husband, he's the spiritual leader. And when Sarai told him to use Hagar, he should have been like, no, silly wife. God will provide. Just you wait, you know. And I just like to take a moment to call bullshit on this. I personally think the Bible teaches equal partnership in a marriage, despite what a lot of conservative Christians think. I will be linking a nice Bob Cornwall article that details the defense of this for those interested, but just to gloss over that for time, just taking that position into consideration, we can't put the blame solely on Abram. Sarai was the one that brought up using Hagar, and she backed up her reasoning with God's own words, or lack thereof, since he never mentioned her specifically, and most likely she was the one who was most upset about not being able to conceive. And Abram seemed like he was fine with waiting until Sarai mentioned it to him, and he would know how difficult this was for her, and he just wanted her to be happy, you know, as any good husband would. And let's be honest, getting permission from his wife to sleep with another woman probably didn't help. But it was Sarai initially leading Abram into that arrangement, steering him away from God's supposed plan and into her own. And yes, Abram could have resisted, but Sarai didn't have to insist either. Just like the snake in the garden, she's at least like 30% to blame, and I think her putting it all on Abram only shows her own insecurities of being the one in the wrong. I just wanted to throw that out there. So let's finally move on and find out what happened to Hagar after she ran away. The next verse reads, "And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain on the way to Shur." So real quick, Shur is on the way to Egypt. So she was going back to Egypt, the only other home she'd known, and also the place that enslaved her in the first place. So not really much of a home, but to her, it seemed a safer bet with Sarai. And also, as I've mentioned this before, but the angel of the Lord is generally seen as Old Testament code for Jesus, pre-Jesus, as I like to call him, because you know he's just one of the Trinity heads. He's not Jesus yet, so he's pre-Jesus. I won't go into the evidence for this here since I already did in a previous video, but the Enduring Word article and the YouTube link in the sources will give you the rundown of it. But just wanted to give that quick context for that verse. But moving on to the next one, it reads, "And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai." Alright, so pre-Jesus asks where she came from and where she's going, because Hagar was moving off of emotions and she didn't really have a solid plan, and pre-Jesus wanted her to consider this. All she knows is that she wants to be far away from Sarai, and she's facing a long walk through the desert. Mia wanted some of my cookies. Gotta have those cookies, yeah. That's the only reason people go to church is for the food. You know? Especially those southern ones. But Hagar, she's facing a long walk through the desert as a pregnant woman, and likely enslavement if she is able to get back to Egypt alive. So not great options as far as one can tell. But now comes the tricky part in the next verse, which is, "And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude." Yeah, okay, so let me take a sip for this one.
Mm-hmm. I'm listening, by the way.
I know.
I like this.
So here's the difficult part. I'm still figuring out how to balance this phone. So Hagar ran away from her abusive masters, as everyone should when given the opportunity, but then pre-Jesus comes and tells her to go back and submit to those same masters. Now, if you take the traditional interpretation, this seems fine. Hagar and Sarai were both acting petty, and he's just encouraging Hagar to be the bigger person. You know, not only that, but, you know, if she goes back, he will reward her by making a great nation out of her son, as well as, like, other things, which we'll get into for the next verse. But that doesn't seem like a sketchy thing if we're taking the traditional view. But if you take the more modern view, that Hagar is completely the victim in this sounds like an awful thing for God to tell a runaway slave who had been raped and probably beaten, if not harassed. Like, sure, Hagar's options were between that and dying in the desert, or being like a slave in Egypt, which probably wouldn't treat her any better, maybe even worse. But God could have taken care of Hagar anywhere that she was. You know, why send her back? Like I said before, this is a difficult question to answer, but not impossible. And if I can be honest, I don't actually know for sure, but there's some theories that could still potentially make sense of this. Perhaps Hagar really would have been safer with Abram and Sarai. Maybe God didn't want Abram to lose his first child. Maybe God didn't want to lose Hagar. Maybe it was one of just like those ridiculous test of faith things, you know, one of those easy write-off answers.
Go kill your son.
Yeah.
And I'll give you everything you want.
Yeah, just do it.
Oh, wait, don't do it.
Yeah,
wait, I was just joking.
Yeah, because you have to, because I said so. just for funsies, just to see if you will, you know. Mm-hmm. No real reason, just for that.
That the story of Lot and
No, that's Abram and Isaac.
Oh, is it that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
My bad.
That's later.
I'm not awake yet.
That's all right. So, based on my own personal experience, I think that there's a chance that God wanted Sarai and Hagar to be able to at least coexist amicably together. More so, it's an opportunity for Sarai to stop being a bitch. I think a lot of people these days see abusers as unredeemable, you know, forever stuck in their ways. And that's certainly true for probably most abusers, especially ones with untreated mental illnesses, as most of them tend to be. However, I will admit, I myself actually grew up in an abusive household. My dad was a teen parent who himself came from an abusive home, as well as he just had a bunch of undiagnosed mental issues and traumas. And sad to say, despite loving us dearly, he continued that cycle of abuse when he married my mom and he had me and my sisters. And because nobody ever taught him any other way of handling his frustrations. And after almost a decade and a half of it, the cops eventually got involved, and the courts said that he couldn't see his kids until he took like some kind of anger management. And he could prove that he was cool now. And it was going through that, going through those like anger management classes and everything, that he could and was able to manage and control his problems a lot better. And I'm very proud to say that he's doing so much better now. And most people probably wouldn't even guess that he had that side to him. He's a very cool guy. And I love him dearly. If he's watching, hello, I love you. But unfortunately, he got that help just a little bit too late, and my mom had just lost all trust in him, and he just hurt her like too many times and for too long, and it was just a very messy divorce ended up ensuing afterwards. And they both eventually married different people, and they are mostly over it, but they can still barely even talk to each other without getting like extremely triggered and upset. And it's very sad because they're both wonderful, God-fearing people. But there's just so much hurt there. And it definitely sucks for me, having two awesome parents that can't even talk to each other and move on from all that pain. Like, they definitely try to be cordial about it, but it's very strained. You can tell. But, to pull back, my dad was in fact able to rehabilitate himself with God's guidance, and he is living proof that abusers can in fact stop being abusers. And I'm sure he's not the only one, and I bet there were even ones that were able to get help in time before their whole family fell apart. And so looking at Hagar and Sarai, I wonder if maybe God wanted that for them. He wanted to give these two God-fearing women an opportunity to make amends and be one in the church. And he knew that they were capable of it. It definitely wasn't beyond repair. God just hates to see two people, especially ones that love him, hate each other. Like anyone doesn't like being caught between like two friends that hate each other, just in getting in the middle of that. But it was really up to them whether they could get over that tension. Maybe when Hagar left Abram's only child, or left with Abram's only child, that was enough to humble Sarai, at least for a little while. But, spoiler alert, it doesn't last if it did. Sarai ends up resenting Hagar's son, possibly for good reason, but we'll get into that in another video. But she ends up sending the two away. But that decision is on Sarai and her insecurities. Hagar did what God told her. She can leave with her head held up high, officially free from her abusers, knowing she followed God, while Sarai could not, as the kids say, get over herself. So God was faithful to Hagar. He took care of her and her son despite the tragedy, and she ended up mothering one of the most prominent races of history. They will eventually become the Arabs, who would go on to form Islam, which, it's definitely not in line with Christian beliefs, but you can't deny God kept his promise to take care of them and build them into a mighty nation. So on that note, let's just now move on and consider the other things that God promised Hagar and her descendants. The next verse reads, And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, that is, God shall hear, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and she shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord who spoke unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked upon him that seeth me? Okay, so this is probably the most confusing thing in this chapter if you're looking at it at face value. God basically said her son will be a wild donkey man, The term donkey is actually used in the original text, and that's going to be important later. So I just wanted to note that real quick. But he's going to be a wild donkey man, and he's going to fight everyone, and everyone's going to fight him, and he's going to live in open hostility to everyone. And if you're considering the white man's history of the Arabs, you'd probably think that sounds about right. Another one of God's prophecies have come true. Nothing more to see here. But consider also, Hagar seems to think that this is great news, like so much so that she goes back to her abusive masters, which seems odd. It looks like God told her son Ishmael would be an asshole that's constantly fighting everyone, and her reaction as a mother is, I feel seen by God. This is all I've ever wanted. Excellent, And now I'm sure you could just write this off as Hagar having some weird Egyptian standards. She is a foreigner after all. But I personally sensed that there was something more to this. And you know what? There was. And upon further research, I discovered this is one of those verses you're not fully going to understand unless you also understand the language and historical context. So first of all, God confirms that she's having a son, which is great because she probably was worried that Sarai would be more abusive if she had a girl, which likely further motivated her to escape. Secondly, there weren't a lot of horses where they were in the Mideast, but there were donkeys, and many of which just ran around free as a bird. So when God is saying your son is going to be a wild donkey, he's really saying your son is going to be free like a wild animal. So think the wild Mustangs running through the plains of the Old West. That is one of the best things that a slave could hear. Your child will not be a slave. Just, chills. So the third part, it's sort of a mistranslation. The original text implies more of a fierce independence. So Ishmael will be so independent of other people, it will be to the point of going against the tide. He will not bend to the will of others, no matter how much pressure they put on him. And this will inevitably cause a bit of fighting. This is another great thing from a slave's perspective, because a slave is so dependent on their master to care for them. They are obligated to do whatever they tell them to in order to avoid causing harm to themselves. So it would have been absolutely delightful for Hagar to hear that Ishmael and his descendants will be so on top of their shit that they will not bend to any ruler. They will be their own rulers. And that's all Hagar really wanted, at least for her child, if not for herself. Freedom and the power and will to do whatever they want. And yeah, that's a bit of a double-edged sword. The Muslim faith is probably the most strict and visually unique of all the major religions. If we're averaging all the various denominations, they have a tendency to be against anything that's not catered specifically to the Muslim religion, especially for the stricter observers. And that kind of legalism can get in the way of not only your relationship with God, but your relationship with others, at least the ones who hold to a different faith. Of course, not all Muslims are so strict and rigid, especially the ones who grew up in America. But I will say that I am grateful to have faith in a God where faith is all that's required of me. And I'm encouraged to share that faith with others as gently as possible. But I will digress on that tangent. The main point is, God promised Hagar to break her from her chains one way or another if she could only face her abuser again. And it's worth noting, he didn't make her go back, but only told her what would happen if she just held out for just a little bit longer. And Hagar decided for herself she'd prefer God's promise over further enslavement in Egypt or possible death in the desert. And again, we're not sure what purpose it served exactly for Hagar to go back. Perhaps only Hagar or Sarai would know, but we do know that God ultimately kept Hagar and Ishmael safe, and even went on to bless them as much, nearly as much as he blessed Isaac, Abram's and Sarai's son, at least from our point of view. And that's really the message here. Follow God, and the rest will follow. So let's wrap up now with the final verses. So next verse. Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi, that is, the well of him that liveth and seeth me. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So there is some dispute as to where exactly this is, or was, but it was definitely somewhere sandwiched between Egypt and Israel, probably somewhere where that like upside down triangle is that sits between them. You know, if you're looking at a map of the Middle East. Regardless, this name will be mentioned later as the place that Isaac, of all people, will live by. So just a fun fact for you. Moving on to the next verse. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. So clearly, Hagar told Abram about what happened in the desert because Abram dutifully named him as God told him to. It's also worth noting that this is the first instance in the Bible where God tells the mother what to name the kid before they're born. You know, an allusion to what he'll tell Mary when she's pregnant with him, and therefore a very high honor. Stuff like this really makes it clear just how close the Arab lineage was and is to the Jewish one. Like, from this perspective, they really are like the chosen adjacent. They had all the blessings and admittedly curses of the Jewish people, but none of the responsibilities, according to the Bible. And it's just insane how Ishmael and Isaac ended up starting what is probably the most violent and destructive centuries long sibling rivalry. They are literally fighting over who God prefers, and it's even more insane when you throw Jesus into that, the one who makes it so God prefers anyone who believes in him, regardless of lineage and religious practice, depending on the religious practice. But of course, the Christians aren't promoting that perspective, like the majority, like the loud ones that everyone can hear. At least these Christians aren't promoting that perspective. They tend to just side with the Jewish people because of their connection to Jesus. And can I just say, it's really annoying. Like, oh my God, stupid Christians and their blatant hypocrisies and their heresies. Like, it just really makes me ashamed that I am one of them, that I am a part of this crowd. It's just another case of like just needing to separate God from the followers, you know. But I didn't mean to get all political there. I mean, I wrote it down, but I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to do that. Let's just move on to the last, most straightforward verse. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So, Abram was 86 when Ishmael was born, is what that just said. Just stupid King James. I really don't like King James. It's just so annoying. You know, I'm saying this for Mia's benefit. She's over there. I like to do 5 chapters in a certain translation.
Okay.
Just to try it out, you know, just to get a feel for it, you know, just to broaden my horizons. So I'm looking at like another 4 weeks of King James, but I'm kind of considering skipping it because I actually had to like bring up the new international version or like the ESV just to be like, is that really what it said? Because usually I'll just like write the summary real quick and just based off what I said. Yeah, gotta compare.
They're different.
Yeah, because in the King James, it doesn't say that Ishmael is going to be a donkey man. That's like the other one. So,
but that's an important piece. I think a key.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really appropriate when you mentioned.
Yeah.
You have to place that in the time frame and the cultural settings too.
Yeah, it's just
it's true.
It's all connected. Technically, King James makes more sense, like
I think so,
for that verse, but you know, other verses are like more accurate to what the original text said. But
Exactly.
if you're looking at it the original voice without that context, you're gonna be confused.
It's good to just look at all of them.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm debating. Just this is gonna be the only King James, maybe. I don't know. I'll see. I'll see how I feel. But so concludes this absolutely wild chapter. What a ride that was, but I'm sure glad we got through it together. So let's close. We're going to close this section with a prayer request time, but before I list off the requests, I want to say two things. One, I do not think that what God told Hagar should be taken as advice for all abuse victims. I think this was specific to Hagar and her situation. If anything, I think it encourages victims to listen for God's guidance on their specific situation instead of following their own gut reactions. People in those kinds of situations often are like debating internally, like, should I stay? Should I go? If, you know, can they somehow fix their abuser, or is it like a lost cause? And, you know, first of all, only God and them can fix them. You are only a supporter in this. And as a supporter, it's important for you to set up boundaries. You know, they're not going to get fixed if you don't try to teach them anything new. So if they're hurting you, you should leave. Just leave if they're hurting you. And if they don't want you to leave, they will stop hurting you by going to therapy and doing the work needed to learn to treat you right. Like, you gotta get them to show them, you know. And I'd encourage you to talk to a therapist as well. You know, God can do anything, but people don't always hear him that great, and they kind of need a trained professional to help them work through the nitty-gritty. You know, pray to God for guidance and courage, of course, but never be scared to seek help from others too. You know, we were made for fellowship, and there are people who want and can help you. And I'll be linking a hotline website that you can call or text. They also have a local resources directory if you can't like think of anyone off the top of your head. You know, this is not ancient Canaan. We have resources now, and I encourage you to use them. It will be difficult, and I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be very difficult, but you will feel safer and it will be worth it. Trust me. It's not normal to feel insecure and afraid in any relationship. You know that what you are experiencing is not normal. Let people help you. And on that delightful note, I'd also like to announce that I'll be going on a hiatus for the first time for 2 weeks. I got some people visiting, and there's just no way I'm going to be able to work on the Bible study without like sleep deprivation, and sleep is like the most important thing to me. So I'm gonna be taking 2 weeks off, but I will be back October 27th, so hang in until then. So let's just close this out with a prayer request time. So like I said, Mia, she's the one we've been praying for mental and health stuff. Do you have anything to add, Mia?
Just thank you. You guys so much. It's been a long time since I felt that there was a group or fellowship of any type that had me in mind through difficult times.
Of course.
It makes me feel all warm inside. So thank you.
In case you didn't hear that, Mia said thank you. Yeah, that's just the short version. So we're just gonna pray that Mia continues to get better. And speaking of my wonderful dad, he actually got COVID. And he's got type 1 diabetes, and he's unvaccinated. So, I know. but he's been working real hard to be very healthy, and that seems to be working. Like since the pandemic started, he's been like doing supplements and stuff, and that seems to be helping. So he's not in the hospital. He's just kind of quarantining in his new house, and it's very great because he was actually living with a bunch of other people. So it's good that he got his own house to be quarantined in. I'm sure that's a lot easier. So we're gonna be praying that he still gets better. We're gonna pray for Mia, and I also usually give you updates on myself. I'm still doing pretty good, honestly. I still have I've been having like slight anxiety, just like a little bit. I think it's just because like there's just been changes going on, and I'm just getting accustomed to them. And I'm just coming out of like this big depression that I've been in. So I think I'm just like scared it's gonna come back. So far it's been cool. So we're just gonna thank God for that. So we're gonna do that now. We're gonna do an off the cuff prayer for these wonderful people in my life, and also me. So all right. So dear God, thank you for getting Mia to be good enough that we can do Bible studies at our house tentatively. Hopefully it can be like a more permanent thing. But we just pray that Mia continues to get better. We pray that not only does she get physically better, but you strengthen her mentally as well. Like that kind of interacts a lot, the physical and the mental. So I just pray that you help strengthen her and just help her to feel your presence in her life. Not only that you're there, but you're doing things, you're actively doing things in her life to set her up for success. And I just pray that she can feel that. I also pray for my dad. First of all, thank you for making him less depressed. He was depressed for a minute, but he's a lot better now. But now he has COVID, so I just pray that it doesn't get any worse than it is, and he's able to like get through that. And I would also like to pray for. I guess I'm not actually praying for. I would.
We should pray for you and your strength. That no matter your situation, you are always focused on God and fellowship and ministry, and there's something to be said for that. You don't give up, and you keep doing this, and I want to see you keep doing this. You're wonderful at it, and I just pray that God keeps you full of His strength, so you can go on to be a ministry warrior.
Mia said.
I mean that.
Thank you, Mia. Mia said that she wants me to be strengthened, and she thinks I'm really good at ministry, and she hopes that I keep doing it, and that I don't lose sight of God. Did I get everything? Is that basically it? Yeah. She said it a lot nicer than I just did. But yeah, so I what Mia said, do that. And thank you for getting me out of my funk. I just pray that you make the anxiety that I've kind of been feeling go away also. It's really light though. Like that's probably gonna go away eventually. It's just like a matter of getting used to my situation, I think. But thank you for being in our lives. Thank you for not only just being there, but also pushing for things to happen. It's very heartwarming when you can kind of see that happening. It really gives you some encouragement. So thank you, God, for doing that. And that is all I have to say about that. So thank you, God. Amen.
Amen.
Fantastic. We did a Bible study in Mia's house. Yay! So like always, I like to end the Bible studies with a loud worship song. That's what I'm trying to say.
The loud one.
Yeah, the loud worship song. I can't do it on this video because of copyright reasons. But for those watching on Facebook, if you scroll up, I'm sure it will pop up. But for those watching on YouTube, if you go in the description, it'll be the link that is titled Loud Worship. It's going to be that one. So do that. And if you have any questions or comments or prayer requests, put them in the comments, and I'll answer you probably. Mia, do you have any comments or any questions to add to this before I close it out?
I don't think I do.
Mia, I answered all of Mia's questions for this chapter, so we're good.
I think you did a very good job.
Mia said I did a good job. Thank you, Mia. All right, so go listen to the loud worship song, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Okay, bye.